Okay. Hi, everyone. A very good day or evening to each and every one of you. Thank you for joining us tonight or today for Culture and the Smart City Provocations, and a very warm welcome to each and every one of you, whether you are joining us through Zoom or Facebook. I am Shufen, and I am the advisor, curator, and arts manager behind this Culture and the Smart City project. My full-time job is actually my full-time job is being an assistant professor at the Singapore Management University, where I am also lead coordinator of the Arts and Culture Management program. I also wear several other hats, including being Senior Research Advisor to the Global Cultural Districts Network, GCDN for short, which is an international membership association which brings together cultural leaders and institutions and districts across the world interested in the intersection of culture and urban life. And I'm delighted to welcome each and every one of you to tonight's conversation. But before we start the conversation proper, I would just like to share some contextual background behind this project, which might be of possible interest to those of you who are joining us here for the first time. So please bear with me for a few minutes. So the Culture and the Smart City project is a multilateral collaboration initiated by the members of the European Union National Institutes for Culture, or UNIC for short, who are currently based in Singapore. The project is supported under the guidance of the Goethe-Institut Singapore. This project was first conceptualized in a pre-pandemic time, more than 2 years ago. Together with my initial collaborators, Hansong and Aurel, we felt that it was important to draw the focus to urban cultural transformation. In particular, we wanted to contextualize this within the increasingly pervasive presence of digital and media technologies in our urban environments, which then brought to the surface the smart city discourse. While the smart city is not a new concept or discourse, it was a useful framing for us because it is a framework where the arts, culture, creativity, and communities have been not typically considered. So we adopted the Smart City framework as a means to enable us to think about what's missing when we consider the cities of the future. And in particular, to use this framework to highlight the significance of the arts, urban cultural transformation, as well as the human-centric perspectives that draw attention to how the context-specific ways in which we experience, navigate, connect with, negotiate, and play within an increasingly digitalized urban environment, which then brought about this Culture and the Smart City project. Overall, this project aims to create a multidisciplinary and translocal space for deep contemplation and imagination on urban cultural transformation from a smart city perspective. And we hope to do this by bringing together artists, researchers, activists, and experts from varying fields across the globe. And although, like almost everything else, while COVID-19 did disrupt many of our initial plans and dreams, we still managed to complete and launch phase 1, which was a virtual membership network. For more details, I encourage you to visit our website and read the many thought-provoking insights of our phase 1 fellows. What's worth noting from this phase as well is that we specially produced 2 videos featuring our Singaporean contributors, which I also urge you to watch as they feature 2 brilliant individuals, their projects and perspectives on the importance of sustainability and community dialogue when thinking about the future city which we would like to live in. Phase 2 was then kick-started in August 2021. For me, it was important for this phase to broaden the conversation by enabling and inspiring others to join in this conversation of what cultural urban transformation means, especially from the perspective of the smart city. Because for us, it is in the unarticulated and unforeseen gaps that new possibilities begin. And I hope that many of you here today will join us in phase 2 and share your insights as well about culture and the smart city. Phase 2 basically consists of 4 public programming strands that you can participate in. One programming strand is obviously this Culture and the Smart City Provocations series, which will consist of live virtual conversations and events and workshops exploring what could and should be the role of urban cultural transformation in the future smart city. We hope that this series will offer fresh perspectives on how culture and cities are evolving before our eyes. We held 2 provocations last year, which I strongly also encourage you to check out the recordings, which you will be able to find on our website as well as on our YouTube playlist. And I believe my colleagues will share the links. And tonight, I am pleased to share that for the third provocation, we'll be joined by two wonderful individuals who will converse with each other and us to further unpack what this term smart city really and even entails through the reimagining of the internet as a poetic garden. This conversation will be held by Taeyoon Choi, who is an artist and educator who is currently based in South Korea and works primarily with drawing, painting, computer programming, performance art, and video. His works explore the poetics of science, technology, society, and human relations. Joining Taeyoon is Associate Professor Chong, who works at the Singapore University of Technology and Design, SUTD for short, where he directs the Social Urban Lab and co-leads the Opportunity Lab, OLAB for short. He is also founding partner of Colors, Collectively Ours, an award-winning design consultancy specializing in public space and social impact. And as a firm believer in design activism, Keng has also been advocating social architecture, community design, and healthy environment in the region through his writings, projects, and many other international exhibitions. And together, they will be exploring the realities of the smart city and hopefully discuss pertinent issues that will also inspire you who are joining us with us to join in the conversation, as I especially hope that the conversation will extend beyond the both of them and that you guys will also join in by sharing your thoughts, comments, and most importantly, questions in the chat. And with that, I hand the virtual floor over to Dr. Chong. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you, Sufan, for the introduction. I'm very, very honored to be invited for this forum, and also very honored to be able to meet up with Taeyoon Choi, a renowned artist in the region, and to learn from him what is the definition of a smart city in this context, and how would art actually play a role in redefining what we already know, or perhaps thinking about the future. So without further ado, let's invite Taeyoon to come and share with us his works and his thought about this topic. Taeyoon, over to you.
Yeah, hi, how's it going?
Yes,
So,
good to have you
yeah,
here tonight.
yeah, I'm very happy to be here. It's for a few reasons, and I'm just gonna play a video of the background. Um, I think like we all have our stories about smart cities, whether it's we've seen it from marketing materials for apartments that we are looking to get, or we are kind of seeing kind of this resurgence of interest in a smart city. And I think today I just want to talk about some of the concerns and some of the options for us as we move forward. And I think I just want to start with this image, which is something that you might have seen before, and something that I come back to, which is three different types of network. And this is popularized through the history of technology and sort of the common understanding of the birth of the internet. There are three types of networks. The one is centralized, the other is decentralized, and the distributed network. The truth is that the networks are always a combination of all of this, and they all contain some strength, weakness, limits, and possibilities. And as an artist, I've been thinking about how we explore these different networks through performances, through drawing, and technology. So here is a piece that I did at the Whitney Museum in 2018, where we explore this concept of decentralized and distributed web through participatory performances, sometimes literally creating a web together with strings. And as you can see, this is before we knew something called a coronavirus. So everybody was dancing together. And also looking at how our smart devices are allowing us to connect with each other and also excluding some other people. And as much of access that it brings, it always has some sort of a wall, either accessibility or paywall or surveillance walls, which I'll get into in a minute. And it really started with a curiosity about a garden, physical garden, literally a garden full of living things, but also a digital garden. Can we think about computers as a garden as opposed to a factory or as opposed to a car? Like, can we think about attending a garden together collectively? And as an artist, I work with technology myself, but also with many different engineers. The collaborative method is quite important. So with a group of amazing engineers in New York at the time where I was living, I created this mesh network, which is a kind of a DIY approach of creating a decentralized and grassroots network. So we could access each other without having to sign up to the regular 3G or 4G telecommunication or other kinds of commercial services. So that's just a quick background about where I'm coming from. And I'm really excited to join tonight's talk for a few reasons. But first, I think I wrote a master's thesis on urban technology and public art. And this is in 2005. And at the time, the GPS and smartphones were just coming into being. And we heard a lot of hype around mobile media or location based media, or sometimes called ubiquitous computing. And there were a lot of optimism about what this could allow, either allowing civic participation or urban play, kind of an intervention, almost in a situationist international approach, and also just more civic engagement. And as we see, the reality is a little bit disappointing. I think I'm speaking from a perspective who's concerned about surveillance of citizens in spaces where the mobility of the human beings are tracked by the government or the corporations or commodified. I'm talking about sort of erasure of a certain types of people in technology and overexposure of certain types of people in through technology. And I have to say, it's kind of totalitarian reality when all these optimism have actually played out to be a bit of a disappointment. I lived in New York City for close to 15 years after my graduate studies in Korea. And I got to meet many activists and organizers, and many of their concerns are about police surveillance of Black and Brown and kind of other people who are expected to have much more criminal activity. And this approach of kind of forecasting crime onto certain kind of demographics utilizing surveillance technology actually lead to catastrophic reality of almost assuming an innocent people and also not taking accountability for the real crimes done by other people. So a group in Detroit, Detroit Community Technology Project, and their allies have been advocating that surveillance is not safety. And they're specifically talking about the police department putting surveillance cameras in areas that are mostly populated by Black and Brown people. And I will not say that technology is the fault. I will say that technology reflects our society, its beauty and limitation, and particularly the carceral system, the prison industrial system, as well as this labor exploit system of the capitalist machines. So we can have different approach of critique of smart city. We can have a Baudelarian approach, which is saying that these modern lanterns or modern CCTVs and GPS leads to a stream of chaos. Liberty melts away. punishment disappears. So this everything melting in the air type of sensation. Well, maybe they said like, all that is solid melt in the air, but maybe all that is computable, something that is, recognized as a smart could melt away, or it would melt away the essence of the life, of individuality, of autonomy, of sense of a community. But maybe that is a little bit too depressing. So I just want to map out like the approach that I'm having to talk about smart city. Is that rather than just saying that it's something that dismantles our life, could we ask what kind of relationship could we build with technology and with each other that brings more agency, more connectedness with ourselves, our community, the humans, the animals, and also the living things, such as the plants, different kinds of critters, as well as the non-living things like the rocks, which we are sitting on, the earth. And what kind of a placemaking and sense making do we initiate with technology? I propose to look at technology much more holistically, comparing it to the earth. So on the one end, there's the networks and applications and all the code that runs on, underneath the surface of a computer. And there's the more philosophical and existential layer, which is like the question of a thing and a not thing, like being and not being, presence and absence, or the zeros and one. So these are the conditions of computing, but also conditions of our existence. And I propose that we talk about and think about our relationship with technology inspired by the nature. And not only to mimic nature, but to really ask what is our cohabitative approach with nature. And I'm particularly excited about moss and lichen and fungus. These three types of very unique organisms that cover the earth, that have these bespoke, trusting relationship with each other and the world around them. So these things don't get a lot of attention, but actually they keep the forest, they keep the different kinds of ecosystems, animals and plants living. And just so beautiful how these fungus are communicating with each other in a very unexpected ways. And these photos are by my friend Sojin Kwak from an island of Jeju, which is the southernmost area of Seoul, of Korea. And I came back to Korea last year, and I had a chance to revisit my storage unit from 20 years ago. And there's a painting that I made when I was 19 years old. And behind the painting, there was a collaboration with nature that I did not know about for the whole time. These bees or bugs kind of created their hive behind the painting. This is something that I reflect on the symbiosis, which is a term that Donna Haraway used to talk about making with nature. So not only symbiosis, but symbiosis, meaning the poiesis as a ability to give form, ability to create. And nature has many lessons for us. Their relationship with each other is not always peaceful. It's actually, it could be a competition, it could be aggression, or it could be neutralism. It could be sort of like not caring for each other, but it could be a mutualism. It could be beneficial for each other. And even the same types of species may have a conflict of interest and have these varying degrees of relations. So inspired by the nature and concerns about our relationship with technology, my recent focus has been to think about mapping these out in a tangible ways and also making with nature and making with other people. in an exhibition that just opened in South Korea. I, mapped out the galleries with the map of the technology and the habitat that I was showing before. And it was a chance to kind of make these at a larger scale and also to make it a visceral experience where people walk around. So that was the introduction. And we go into the map of the universe. In the universe that I think about, which is a cohabitation, the creatures such as moss, lichen, and fungi kind of coexist and co-create. And this is a garden that I'm talking about. Why these three things? Because they're different. All of them actually carry a very different characteristics. They are interdependent on each other, and then they feed into each other's ecosystems. So I think this kind of a complex relationship between moss, fungi, and lichen could be a way for us to think about our relationship with each other and also with things, including technology. In the outside of the museum, there was a sensor that's collecting data, um, the temperature and humidity, that is sending the data through the network, this was actually a radio network connected to the sensors inside of the galleries, and that was affecting the ways that the patterns were created in the LCD screen. And these are just these landscapes of the garden that are kind of self-mutating and kind of transforming. This wasn't exactly a data visualization of the weather. Um, I actually find data viz quite boring because it's a graph. It's a pretty graph. I think art's role is actually to problematize our relationship with the built environment and the sensory experiences. So it's not a one-to-one visualization of the outside, rather the outside affects inside, and then that creates a cohabitative system. What I'm more interested in is like the way to connect people through the technology in physical space. So with their smartphones, they could connect to the garden, and they could actually, create the creatures together. So here's a information video that I created in Korean Sign Language. And I've been working with the deaf and disability community, and accessibility is a big concern of mine. So that was built into the design of the project. And different people can access the project differently. So deaf people have one experience, the blind people actually have a different experience. The blind folks could access the project with the alt text, which is a description of the moving image with textual information. In summary, I wrote some notes today thinking about what to share with you all. So the doom and gloom view of the end of the world, which we might be getting a little bit fatigued, um, and then also the undeniable reality of the climate change. So those two things coexist. And the technology and capitalism, which often are sort of the same thing, not always, but they could be, they kind of race us towards the extinction of the living things and also resource extraction. And I guess my problem with the smart city narrative is that they often further accelerate this narrative in the name of convenience or um, kind of just like what is possible with the new technology. So as individuals and collectives, what types of tool making and platform building can we do to undo the damage of the techno capitalism? Simply, like, how can we be less exploitive? How can we be less harmful, less colonial? Because data collection is a colonial practice. And how can we build towards more abundance of wealth of nature? and wealth not meaning like just material sense, but just so much abundance in nature. And how can we be more adaptive to the contingencies of the new reality? Because I do not romanticize nature as like this sensitive and delicate thing. Nature is brutal and powerful and resilient. They overcome the challenges. So how can we work in respect of that? And here's a little bit of a chapter, like the last page from my friend Alexander Galloway's book called Uncomputable, which just came out this year. And it asks, like, how can we degrow the abuse of power? This notion of a degrowth is quite powerful because he's not advocating for kind of, abandoning technology or the Luddite approach, but rather, how can we refuse to engage in a way that further exploits the world? How can we be uncomputable in a way that creates more space for agency? How can we create technology that allows for more love as opposed to more hate? Finishing up, some of the references for this talk was the Cybernetic Forest, which is a podcast that is created by an artist and author, James Bridle, a few years ago that I contributed on. And my friend Shannon Mattern, who's a professor of anthropology in New York, who wrote a book called A City is Not a Computer, and basically argues against the narrative of a smart city. And her thesis is that city is not, it cannot not be reduced to the metaphor of computation. It's much more messier, it's much more embodied. There's just more things like the materiality of clay, for example, the earth. And Nabil Hussain's Computing Climate Change and All of Our Relationships. Nabil is also a friend who has inspired me so much, thinking about the relationship between software development, it's his profession, and also the climate change, how building of smart systems could actually does lead to climate warming, the global warming, and what can we do to prevent that. And Donna Haraway has wrote a lot about the symbiosis and symbiosis, and I think any of her readings would be recommended. And lastly, there's a very young author in South Korea. Her name is Kim Choi, and she wrote a book called The Greenhouse at the End of the World, which is this post-apocalyptic fiction and a love story between a cyborg and a human scientist. And I think this approach of thinking of a love with technology and cohabitation with technology and the nature was quite inspiring for me. And these are some of the people that I worked with for the last project that I showed, which is called a garden.local. And that's the basis of the name of this talk, which is a poetic garden. So that is my time, and this is my presentation. So back to you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Taeyoon. I think this is really thought-provoking. For me as a researcher working on, somewhat related to smart city, this is something really more like a refresher, more than a refresher, it's more like a critique on what we are doing now and what can we be doing in future. So it's really, really thank you so much for sharing this inspiring talk here and your work. I just want to share that because I'm coming from a university called the Singapore University of Technology and Design. So on one hand, I think technology is something that we are, of course, advocating. So I don't mean to contradict in what we are doing, but on the other hand, I think it's always good to critique, the idea of what role technology can play in the design of our city and design of our ecosystem, and even the language that we use to describe all these different elements. And in fact, I see art as a way of a language that describe that, to make us understand in deeper level as well. So really, I think through this sharing, I think we really understand the real, I mean, what is the real meaning of smart city if you really take it at a much larger holistic level, like your drawings at a universe level, at the beyond this what can be considered as being smart is really beyond just what is computable. So really enjoy your sharing.
Yeah, and I'm also really happy to meet you and also engage with you who is based in Singapore, and many of the audience are based in the region. And I think Korea and Singapore have, it's very different, but also there's a lot of similarities in
Yeah,
urbanization,
yeah.
hyper technocentric approach to space making, governance, and yeah, the and I
We
think
learned a lot from Korea though.
what is it?
We learned a lot from Korea. In fact, we done case studies. I was there for one of my research earlier, a couple of years ago before COVID, at least 2 or 3 times, to learn from various parts of South Korea in the city, how they cope with different kind of challenges, and how from the community at the ground up kind of a process able to respond to this issue and solve, adapt in different ways. So it's something that we really learn from. In fact, fun fact, the plants behind me was planted by my Korean colleague.
Yeah,
She has
we
left
both
the
have
lab.
plans in
Yeah.
the back. Yeah.
Yeah, we
I
both
mean,
have. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of issues with urbanization in Korea, and I my friends are architects, urban planners, and also activists. They there's a lot of stories to tell to tell regarding gentrification and erasure of local communities, and I think most recently displacement of in urban industrial kind of areas, and making that all into shopping malls and tourist zones, and I think that's quite common in many cities and also in Asia. And I'm also following sort of what's happening in China, very similar narrative but at a larger scale, much faster. And oftentimes they brand their initiative under the smart city and to revitalize with new technology. And some of those are true. Like in my apartment, like I could use my smartphone to turn off the lamp or the AC, but is that
Yeah.
really smart? And like, is that all that we can do? Is that all the promises? But we the apartment building actually has much more issues with just the noise. Like there's a lot of debate and complaints about the noise from our neighbors, like up and down, because they just build it so poorly.
Mm.
So it may have a Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, but like the sound protection is poor. So the basic conditions of human living, and I think those are often
Well, I
ignored.
must really say that architecture is lagging behind in terms of this technological advancement. So we haven't really reached the state. But
But yeah,
yeah.
I mean, can we talk about the eco smart city, because that's something that I think is becoming a trend, and I think most people are aware of the environmental impact of urbanization. So they're saying that these new sensors could actually lead to kind of a urban, more responsible development. And
Mm.
I'm excited for it. I'm also
Mm.
cautious about it. It's almost like a greenwashing of urbanization with technology. There's a lot of alarm bells that ring when I see those advertisements with, the Wi-Fi routers and GPS showing like data. I
Yeah.
mean, what are your thoughts on like sort of environmental approach and smart city?
Well, I'll share a little bit of my thinking, but actually, I want to hear more from you about about this as well, because I think some of our work actually intersect each other quite closely. Although we are using different medium, I'm talking about plays, using art, but there is, to some extent, there's some intersection there. But I want to tap on what you had just spoke about earlier, on a few aspects when we talk about smart city. The In the end, what is actually surface was actually the objective of control, or in your term, surveillance, right? On the other hand, it's also about making things convenience. So, like you say, control the lights with your smartphone instead of just walking a few steps to touch a switch. It's really to make ourselves more convenience. Or as some part also related to your writing about capitalism, when all this data that's driven is actually to actually promote consumption, about to consume is actually the objective of the societal progress. So I think it all boils down to, then, is that really smart? Is that really the goal that we are actually trying to reach with humanity, right? So is this really making us smarter, or is it really making us dumber or slower or lazier? So
Right.
it's something really interesting for us to think about, especially we are working in this field. I must admit that I'm also using a lot of data in my personal research and projects and design, and translating it into different types of plays, design and placemaking. But on the other hand, we are again very cautious of who are we including and who are we excluding. Are we, like what you say, overexpose those people we always hear about and underexpose those people who are being marginalized? So yeah, I want to hear your views on that.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think so. It's interesting. There's so in New York City, there are these smart walls that the city has put up that has map, has Wi-Fi, and like it's supposed to be this kiosk to get urban data, and it has one USB port for charging, and it's a ginormous, it's like 2 feet, or it's huge, and every day at any point of the day there's somebody who's charging their phone on that one USB port, and it's inclusive of like the people who are homeless, people who are in a business suit. It's everyone. They
Mm,
just need to charge their phone.
mm.
But why couldn't they have made more of the USB
Yeah.
ports and just single thing and a giant display? So I think that's just a really kind of humorous reality, is that okay, people need to charge their devices,
Mm,
which is real. It's almost like a public service. It's like giving access to a bathroom or water. Like they need to charge their phone.
mm,
But while that is not as taken as seriously as like this ginormous advertising wall, which is what it is, um, I think two trains of thought. One is about advertisement and user data, which are serious issues, and the other one is much more kind of more tragic and also more concerning. Is the idea of a surveillance and lack of civil liberty and freedom in spaces. And there are many arguments for more surveillance in the city. There are studies that do show that if the surveillance camera is positioned in a way that is made through consent of the community, it could lead to more safety, it could lead to more environmental monitoring. But there are just so much real life experience and data that shows the other way is true, which means that more surveillance actually leads to more crime, or kind of the crime that is less visible but more impactful. So I think those two things actually open up some space for our conversation,
mm,
which is that even the same technology could lead to more egalitarian society or more a draconian reality of surveillance theater.
mm,
Um, and as an individual, as a participant of a society, we often have a very little say on what the city or the government or the police decide. And even when they do, it's just under a very few restrictions about our choices. um, I think alternatively, I think making more independent technology and platforms that are civic driven, which we have seen through the COVID responses of mutual aid and different kinds of local networking, is very promising.
Yeah.
Um, I want to talk a little bit about QR code. Is QR popular in Singapore?
It is almost mandatory for everyone to scan a QR code to some
Is that
extent. But now we are using Bluetooth mostly.
but is that
Yeah,
so before COVID or after COVID?
after COVID. Before COVID, it was yeah, starting. It was quite slow, in terms of the take up rate, but COVID really speed up everything.
It's so
I
interesting. Yeah,
yeah.
I do not want to say kind of a conspiracy theory, but I think I think this totalitarian reality that the sort of George Orwellian vision of the Big Brother, sort
Yeah.
of like had its day because of COVID, because we have no choice but to scan ourselves.
Mm.
Like I thought the QR thing would just disappear as like a kind of a once upon a time technology, but it's here forever, or like we have, at least for now. And like the promises of the locative media or the ubiquitous computing, it just didn't happen in the way that like the activists or the sort of liberal academics were envisioning, but it really happened in a much more of a kind of mandatory kind of a sense of urgency approach, which the COVID really escalated.
Mm.
And I also have mixed feelings about it because in Korea you have to check in everywhere, and like the government literally keeps track of where you are and your temperature, for God's sake, and that's really scary. But at the same time, the U.S. like government does not enforce anything, and then we've seen what happens, which is just like kind of this mess of you know lack
Yeah.
of accountability.
Yeah.
So mixed feelings all
Yeah.
around.
In fact, there was in Singapore there was some feedback earlier on when they realized that the police can actually make use of this data to actually in response to some serious crime, because earlier on it was said that all this data will not be used for any other function other than tracking COVID situation, right? But you realize that actually the law did allow police to use that to solve certain issue that they need to do. So they sort of it really create a public conversation or debate about this issue, and in the end, I mean, it was but I think the good thing is generate a lot of more awareness about data, about safety. All these other issues will not be able to surface in the normal time. So I think thanks to also in the way thanks to COVID, all these conversations start to surface, and we had to address that in a more sort of understanding manner. That yes, health and safety is still important, but at the same time, I think data protection and crime rates and all these are also equally important. How do we balance all these different forces?
Yeah, I mean that reminds me of like just the South Korean government. Like when you enter the Incheon airport, which is the large airport, you have to take a photo and like fingerprint. And no surprise, like government literally sold like hundreds of thousands of photo of the foreigners entering Korea to a private AI facial recognition company. For God's sake, like why? And like you didn't ask me or anyone when we were entering, like your face will be sold to a private entity for
Mm,
facial recognition. Like it's just so mind-boggling, and also like what are you gonna do? You can't hide your face
mm,
when you're entering, like you have to.
mm.
So I don't know. I think, I mean, some of the artist friends of mine have developed some makeup approach to actually mess with the facial recognition so that the AI cannot recognize who you are. Like very smart. I think go for it as long as it's okay with the law.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think just we have tons of questions which we should jump into. I think
Right.
the
Yeah. If not, you'll be dominated by our
yeah, but can
conversation.
we? I just want to drop one thing, which is you know, but at the same time, like the smart technologies allow accessibility for people who are
Yeah.
disabled. Like I cannot underestimate how important it is that these new technologies actually connect people who otherwise would not have been. So I'm just saying like we should for for sure continue to develop technology and use it in a mindful way, but
Yeah.
let's just not think it will solve our problems.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think as we are, exchanging views and debating and critiquing some of this advancement, it's not that we are uh, against any of this technology, right? We actually want to see how they can benefits our human life and our society as a whole. Just that we also have to be mindful as we are developing them and use them, right, in a more ethical way. Let's look at some of the very interesting question. Um, JX say that very interesting about your take on relationship between degrowth and making cities smart. What do you feel the viability of degrowth as a movement in both developing nation and techno capitalist centers, places like Singapore? Uh, in what ways do you think my principles of degrowth might be compatible, introduced in value system in cities which have their vibrance and flourishing contradictory predicated upon talent flow and unlimited consumption? Wow. And regarding degrowth, as someone who has moved across cities throughout continents, how do you think one can embrace values of degrowth across different cultural contexts?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I will just pose it also as a question for all of us is that, like the degrowth could mean a few things. The literally it could mean much of a anti-capitalist approach of slowing down and kind of refusing mass production and kind of choosing ways of life that is less based on growth. Um, and then we have this question about like, then how do you survive? Because the whole mode of survival today is about growth and accelerating personally and as a collectively. I think to your question, I think there's a lot to learn from nature because nature does not grow. Like it grows, but it also slows down and it kind of grows together. And the ways that the lichen and moss and fungus kind of grow together is that it one does not dominate the other. So just thinking about our relationship in the built environment as a cohabitation as opposed to domination. I think that's sort of what I'm thinking about in more metaphorical sense.
Mhm.
Um, yeah. So, do you have some thoughts?
I think I definitely I think actually it brings back to the point that I didn't really make about I really like your analogy of using nature as a way to rethink the our own society is working. I like the idea that you attempt on the very bottom up kind of technology on distributed network. In fact, I'm trying to see whether that can be applied in architectural planning as well. Um, but in JX question, part of that is also asking how does it like able to apply in both the developing and developed nation? Is there a difference, and does cultural context makes a difference for you that you experience different kind of culture, the East and the West? Does it make a difference?
Yeah, I mean that actually complicates this question because we are talking mostly in the developed nation context of places like Singapore, Korea, United States. But I've had a really interesting conversation with people in developing countries who actually say that you know they see a lot of opportunities in kind of bridging and minimizing the gaps in their society through arts, design, and technology, and some a lot of times something that I'm criticizing. And because the societal infrastructure is so lopsided, and because the existing social order contains so much hegemonical violence, such as like different class system or sexism or racism, they see this kind of an interruption through tech and practices as their chance to shake things up in those places. And here we have a challenge. Then we like, how do we avoid making mistakes of the people who came before us, and how do we build in a way that is actually more wiser as opposed to smarter? And
That's a very good term.
yeah,
Maybe we should go for wise city rather than smart city.
yeah, and it will just be wise ass and just give advices on each other. Just don't do that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because I think everybody has a different set of wisdom, almost like your distributed network of perhaps knowledge or wisdom that we can count on each other in times of crisis or in times of needs. And that's how the city itself can be more resilient rather than a totalitarian kind of civilians. But what about the bottom up kind of resilience through this kind of um, interdependence wisdom?
Yeah, and I guess I'm less interested in comparing developed nations and developing nations in the metrics of their, average income or like, their standard of living, but much more on like the community's relationship with each other and also the environment around them. And I had a really amazing chance to meet some activists from South America who were, they were living in villages that were not in the standard of a developed nation, like far from it. Like there are farmers and they take care of cattle. And these activists were building mesh network that were kind of providing access for them to use technology. And these local villages were not connecting to Instagram or TikTok. They just needed to access like their essential information about farming. They had to get information about their city, their weather. So their needs were quite different. So I think that's really interesting to think about, like, you know maybe there the internet as we know it is built around certain principles of capitalism, and they make profit from our engagement in their platform. So Instagram, for example, just benefits from us being online because of the advertisement and because it brings more value for their um, the, the platform. But maybe that's not everything that we need. Maybe we could use different kinds of network. And that's some as an artist and an organizer, that's been my primary interest. I use those platforms because people are there, like my community is there, it's powerful. But can we think about different approach?
Mm,
And there are many alternatives like peer-to-peer networks,
mm,
federated social networking, more open source approach. The biggest barrier of entry is the tech. Oftentimes sometimes you need to code or need to use Linux, which is not really accessible for most people. So on one hand, we have the activists, technologists who are just trying to make it easier for people to use, which they should. On the other hand, there's like people who are trying to bring those applications to more of the everyday users, like my great aunt who has struggled with emails, but she can use Kakao Talk, which is like WhatsApp, but in Korea. She could use certain kinds of a very commercial platforms. But can we make those tech available for people like my aunties, people who don't have the time and resource to learn? So I just think it needs to happen in two path approach, more anti-capitalist open sourceware approach, and also bringing more accessibility for more general platforms.
I think, well, at this moment, agree that tech may be an issue, but in the long run, it's also how to sustain the kind of knowledge spread and all that. I think that's could be the next phase. But there's another question on whether both of us could comment about the future of Anthropocene, especially in relation to the smart city discourse. And I'm sorry, I think I skipped one question from Jasmine about actually about my thoughts about smart city discourse. I think I shared a little bit earlier about that. Maybe if there's chance I can share more. But
I mean, why don't you start with your thoughts on smart city, and then we can go to Anthropocene, because like
yeah.
the A question is like
Okay.
huge, and like I don't even know where do we begin, where do we
I don't
end.
know. Yeah, as I think as I shared bits and pieces earlier, my thinking is that I'm still questioning on the terms or definition of smart city. In fact, I'm also questioning both the term smart and the term city itself, right? In terms of smartness, as I share, are we are we developing technology for the sake of making our environmental smarter, but making us dumber? Or should it be the other way around, that it should actually make us making smarter decision and in a way more efficient, but at the same time also really looking into the quality of that decision that we are making. So it's not just making fast and quick decision, but disregard what is going on next 5, 10, 20 years, but really making a decision that have a larger impact in future. So these are the kind of a more qualitative kind of definition of what can we define smartness and how can we make use of data to help us to understand that. So I'm totally not against using data as a means to really understand ourselves, understand the nature of our society. But on the other hand, is how do we make use of that, right? And who in the process are being included or excluded. So it's in that sense, it's quite similar to your thought. On the other hand, I'm also thinking city may be may or may not be the good geographical kind of scale that we are actually looking at when we want to talk about smartness, right? Well, city as a whole is like a accumulation of so many other things. So if you really want to make things really smart, it should actually go down to the smaller scale, I believe, at the if you really bring down to a town level, the neighborhood level, the precinct level, the community level, the personal level, then we can talk about how all these network are coming together to depend and share knowledge, share information, and makes the entire network much smarter. I think these are the things that somehow we haven't really go really deep into. Yeah. So I don't know how it relate to the next question. Maybe you can take over.
Yeah, thank you for that. And next question was about like the future of the Anthropocene and like
Yeah.
in relation to smart city discourse. You know, both terms are quite loaded, the Anthropocene and smart city. And um, I guess my approach to answering this question is about kind of classification that we are assuming when we are asking these questions. And as I said, like I believe the smart city is like that term is a cliche, and I think it's a marketing term as opposed to a real technical term. And so there you go. Like I just, I think the core of the matter is not regarding the smartness of the city. I think it's about um, connectedness, and I think it's about agency. And
Mm,
if smart sensors such as temperature sensor or whatever could actually make us help us make a more informed decision, or help us to be be more comfortable, I think that's great. I just don't think it will do it itself. Like, I don't think, the whole distinction between being able to compute does not mean that it can make wise decisions. The Anthropocene part is that I think this comes to some of the earlier bits that I was trying to get at, is about the eco smart city and like the discussions around that. Is that, yeah, I think these technologies could be helpful to bring more awareness about environmental change and to help us make better decisions about our use of materials, waste, and energy, etc. But again, I think that's kind of a bells and whistles for a really large problem. So unless we change the structural approach to our living being and, sort of making ourselves our place in the world, I think it won't fix the issues. So I think yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. I think Echo Smart City is a little bit confusing and concerning, but I look forward to how that could actually be bring change. I think I just been so disappointed in the last 15 years, the whole smart city discourse, and I think I will continue to be disappointed with whatever new gadgets that they bring on to fix our environmental problems. Would actually be a kind of a smoke and mirrors, and like it's just the same kind of a real estate development. It's the same kind of a large corporations that will just build these ginormous cities all around this country, around the world, and the real estate price goes up, and the locals are displaced. So yeah, maybe it's more green, maybe it's more environmental to have the sensors, but like, what about the larger ecosystem? And yeah.
Well, at least I think we both agree that ultimately the smart system is to help us to really make a better informed decision, and at the same time become an agency, right? To really empower us to do things that's better for the world. So, which link to the final question that we might have here. The point about making smarter decision doesn't mean that we are being better people. So yeah, I think absolutely right. Smarter for whom? Smarter for us, for the economy, for the environment. So I think that's really a good question that we should continue to critique the whole movement at the same time, without really losing sight of where we are heading, right? But I think if I may summarize it, where we talk about a lot of control and a lot about consumerism, computation, but ultimately, I think I would like to bring up this another C word called the consciousness. Um, I think with all these different movements, and I think if they are able to help us to be more conscious of what we are doing, at least I think we are already making one step better to make a very conscious decision, whether or not it's smart, whether it's dumb, whether we are smart or dumb. That is at least one step better.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, this is a great question to sort of finish, and I just think there's a lot to learn from the urbanization of the last century. And in case of New York, there's a Robert Moses, who was the great builder and kind of master planner, and also the kind of bureaucratic powerhouse of enabling highways and bringing a lot of efficiencies to the city, but also destroyed the whole sort of the neighborhoods and kind of ripped it apart into this bits and pieces of a basically a very boring, very similar urbanization pattern. And there's people like Jane Jacobs who are fighting for kind of a more community and more neighborhood approach and more human level to urbanization. And thanks to her, many of the neighborhoods actually exist today, like Soho, West Village, and Meatpacking, are all the areas that she literally fought Robert Moses for. So if those people exist today, who are they in your city? And like, how would they approach smart city? Because I think J&J's cups would be quite opposed to a lot of the surveillance things that, even if it brings surveillance, I think should be really wary of, that kind of overexposure of the civic life. And I think Robert Moses would love CCTVs all around each corner of the streets, and that would just be more efficient. It, I don't know. Like I just been watching the Squid Game, which is like the Netflix show,
Oh
which you
yeah.
might have seen. God, it's just so depressing and like so
What do you
real.
think about that? I
It's
want to
just
hear.
so real. That's the like. It's just not a like the ways that there's a lot of like hidden metaphors, like the very specific Korean kind of a subtext of
Oh,
the children's games,
right.
of like the gender conflicts. There's like the class conflicts, and also just the space. Like that is a giant smart city. Like they
Wow,
have
yeah.
built, like that is fully
Right.
controlled. It's just such a dystopian approach, and like I would not want to live in a place like that. Like I don't think anybody would. But if
Hmm.
the builders of the great cities are imagining that as sort of vision, like what do we have in our power to change that? And
Hmm.
how can we build together collectively and also as individual?
Hmm. It's like if you are in the Squid Game, how do you play?
Or how do you not
How
play?
do you not play? Yeah,
How
that's a
do
good one.
you win by
Yeah,
not fighting, which is
yeah,
like the best tactic.
right, right. Well, I think we leave it as that. We already went past the timing. Well, there is one question about a more local question. Uh, JX, is it okay if I can reply you later on? You can draw me an email. Maybe I can we can have a more local kind of private exchange.
Oh yeah, and I just want to take a moment that I'm actually collaborating with a Singapore-based organization called the Arts Equator, which is a really wonderful platform for arts and culture criticism and reporting. And we are organizing an online forum in March on disability arts and activism, inviting the presenters from South Korea and also from Singapore. So look out on the Arts Equator website and etc. when we have stuff ready. But
When is it ready?
um, to be confirmed, but the first week of March. So we're just finishing up some of the details.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's a conversation around access and expression of disabled artists.
Hmm.
And I'm learning so much about Singapore as a culture, but also as like, a space where people live and make art.
Hmm.
And I'm really looking forward to that conversation. So if you look out for Arts Equator Disability Arts Forum, you'll see announcements in after the Lunar New Year time.
Thanks. I think I'm really looking forward to that. Well, since you talk about that, I just have a similar kind of parallel project. I'm also working with currently community with person living in dementia. So because Singapore facing aging issues, I think South Korea as well. There's quite a substantial portion of the seniors having dementia. So we are working with them and through placemaking to how to make our place more inclusive. And we are actually using art as a medium to use creative activities and art and transform those spaces to be more inclusive and more participatory. Perhaps when you are here, we can share with you
Yeah,
more and see how we can collaborate.
that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you both. So thank you, Taeyoon, and also thank you, Keng for enriching the culture and the Smart City project with your participation. I think tonight's conversation was an important contribution by prompting us to think further about our own human relationships, not just with technology, but also with our urban and natural environments. As Taeyoon had mentioned, the current Smart City discourse is both A little confusing, but also concerning, and also maybe a bit disappointing. But hence, what I particularly appreciated was that many of the points raised tonight also related with broader discourse beyond the smart city, such as with other loaded terms such as the Anthropocene, and also with the fields of new materialist philosophy, interface criticism, and digital aesthetics, particularly about questions about new materialism and questions of becoming, as well as the limits of techniques and technologies. So I hope each of you who have graciously joined us in tonight's conversation have also found this discussion insightful. Just before we officially close this session, I would just like to reshare that tonight's dialogue is just one of the many more upcoming programs that is part of the Cultures and the Smart City project. The Culture and the Smart City Provocation series will continue with more virtual dialogues and events. In fact, the details for our next provocation series is already out, and you can register it by scanning the QR code, because as Keng Hua mentioned, QR codes are very much a part of our everyday lives today in Singapore. This dialogue will take place on the 10th of February online and will feature Dr. Priya Korn from Thailand in conversation with Singaporean artist and researcher Sean Chua. You will also be able to find the registration link on this in the Zoom chat. We also have an upcoming hybrid exhibition in March 2022, which will feature a diversity of artists from Singapore and Southeast Asia. We will also be featuring the winning works from our global open call that we held last year. We invite you to keep updated on our programs either by following us on our social media channels or checking our website regularly. Importantly, on behalf of my team, Victoria, Carissa, Charlotte, Jasmine, and myself, we would like to thank Valerie and Christine from the Goethe-Institut Singapore for their generous support. And we would also like to thank you for being such a warm and engaged audience. And we hope to see you soon in other programs of this project, whether virtual or face-to-face. So with that, thank you. We wish you well, stay safe, and have a good day or night.